Assassination in Dallas, November 22nd, 1963. Dealey Plaza, Dallas. President John F. Kennedy was riding in an open-top Lincoln Continental, waving to crowds that lined the streets. He was 46 years old, elected to the presidency at 43, making him the youngest person ever elected to the office. His wife Jackie sat beside him in a pink suit. Texas Governor John Connally and his wife occupied the seats in front of them. At 12:30 in the afternoon, the motorcade turned onto Elm Street. Seconds later, a shot rang out. Kennedy raised his hands to his throat. The bullet had struck him in the upper back, passed through his neck, and exited through his throat. He was badly wounded but still alive. Jackie turned toward him, confused, seeing blood but not yet understanding. Then came the second shot. It struck the back of his head. The impact was devastating. Bone shattered. Brain tissue sprayed across the trunk of the car. Jackie crawled onto the back of the vehicle, reaching for pieces of skull. His heart, operating on automatic function despite the catastrophic brain injury, continued beating briefly as his body shut down. The Lincoln raced to Parkland Memorial Hospital. Secret Service agents carried Kennedy inside. Doctors cut away his clothes and began resuscitation efforts. They could see the massive head wound. Brain matter was exposed. His pupils were fixed and dilated. There was no reflex response. An electrocardiogram detected a faint heartbeat initially, but no pulse or blood pressure could be found. Still, they continued working, inserting breathing tubes, administering fluids, performing chest compressions. They knew it was hopeless. The damage was too severe. No one survives that kind of injury. At 1 o'clock in the afternoon Central Standard Time, a doctor placed his stethoscope against Kennedy's chest one final time. There was no heartbeat. President John F. Kennedy was pronounced dead. Lee Harvey Oswald was arrested approximately 90 minutes later and was himself shot 2 days later by Jack Ruby in the Dallas County Jail. Death after just a month. March 4th, 1841. William Henry Harrison became the 9th President of the United States. He was 68 years old, the oldest man to assume the presidency at that time. On Inauguration Day, he stood before a crowd in cold, wet weather and delivered the longest inaugural address in American history. Nearly 2 hours, 8,445 words. He wore no coat and no hat, determined to prove his vigor despite his age. 3 weeks later, he fell ill. A cold, he told his staff. Nothing serious. But the symptoms grew worse. He developed a fever, then chills that made his whole body shake. Sharp pains stabbed through his abdomen. His doctors diagnosed pneumonia and began treatment. Bleeding, blistering, medicines made from Virginia snake root and crude petroleum. Nothing helped. What the doctors did not know was that the White House water supply was contaminated. Sewage from a nearby depot seeped into the groundwater. Every glass of water Harrison drank likely carried bacteria. The symptoms pointed not to pneumonia alone, but to enteric fever, typhoid. His fever climbed higher. He became delirious, calling out for his doctor, speaking words that made no sense. His intestines were under siege from bacterial infection. First came constipation and abdominal pain that lasted for days. Then his bowels opened with a flood of watery diarrhea. Internal organs began to fail one by one. For 9 days after becoming ill, he weakened. Each day brought more pain, more confusion, less strength. There was no recovery, no moment where he seemed better, just a steady, miserable decline. By early April, he could barely remain conscious. His breathing grew shallow. His pulse weakened. His skin turned cold and blue. On April 4th, 1841, at midnight, William Henry Harrison died, exactly 31 days after taking office. The building meant to house the nation's leader had poisoned him. The water that should have sustained him carried the infection that killed him. He served the shortest presidency in American history, brought down not by politics or war, but by contaminated water flowing beneath the White House itself. Assassination by an Anarchist, September 6th, 1901, Buffalo, New York. The Pan-American Exposition was in full swing, and President William McKinley stood in the Temple of Music greeting the public. He was 58 years old, beloved by many, relaxed in the receiving line. A man named Leon Czolgosz approached with his right hand wrapped in a white handkerchief, as if injured. No one suspected the cloth concealed a .32 caliber revolver. Czolgosz raised the hidden weapon and fired twice at point-blank range. Both bullets struck McKinley in the abdomen. The president staggered backward but remained conscious. Guards tackled the shooter to the ground. McKinley, even as blood soaked through his shirt, told them not to hurt Czolgosz. He was rushed to an emergency hospital on the exposition grounds. Doctors operated immediately. They found the first bullet lodged in surface tissue and removed it easily, but the second bullet had gone deeper, tearing through his stomach. Surgeons searched for it, cutting through layers of abdominal tissue, but could not locate it. With no x-ray machine used and fading light in the operating room, they cleaned the wound as best they could and stitched him closed. For several days, McKinley appeared to recover. He sat up in bed. He ate solid food. Doctors announced he would survive. The nation breathed relief. But on September 12th, his condition began to deteriorate. Something had gone terribly wrong inside. Gangrene had been spreading through his abdomen the entire time. The bullet had perforated his stomach and pancreas, allowing digestive fluids and bacteria to leak into surrounding tissue. Infection ravaged organs the doctors never saw. His body went into septic shock. By September 13th, he grew weak and began losing consciousness. On September 14th, 1901, 8 days after the shooting, William McKinley died at 2:15 in the morning. The bullets had not killed him instantly. The infection had. Czolgosz was executed by electric chair 45 days later, on October 29th. Sudden death possibly hastened by bloodletting. December 13th, 1799, Mount Vernon, Virginia. George Washington, at 67 years old, had been riding his horse across his estate in freezing rain and snow. He returned home with his clothes soaked through, but refused to change before dinner. That night he woke struggling to breathe. His throat had swollen shut. The pain was severe. He could barely speak. By morning his condition had worsened. His wife Martha sent for doctors. 3 physicians arrived and immediately began the standard medical treatment of the era, bloodletting. They believed removing bad blood would cure the infection. The first doctor made an incision in Washington's arm. 12 to 14 ounces of blood drained into a bowl. Washington grew visibly weaker, but the doctors saw no improvement. They decided more blood needed to come out. A second bleeding, then a third. Each time, more blood flowed from his body. By the end of the day, they had removed approximately 80 ounces, nearly 40% of his total blood volume. His face turned pale. His lips lost color. He struggled even harder to breathe now, gasping for air through a throat that continued to swell. The infection was likely acute epiglottitis, a rapid swelling of the tissue near the voice box. It was blocking his airway more with each passing hour, but the blood loss made everything worse. His body had no strength left to fight. His heart struggled to pump what little blood remained. He could not speak anymore, communicating only through weak gestures. By afternoon, Washington knew he was dying. He asked to be allowed to go in peace. He lay in his bed gasping, suffocating slowly, as his throat closed and his blood pressure dropped. Between 10 and 11 at night on December 14th, 1799, George Washington died. The treatment meant to save him had drained away his chance of survival. Slowly poisoned by decades-old lead bullets. June 8, 1845. Nashville, Tennessee. Andrew Jackson lay dying at his estate, the Hermitage. He was 78 years old, but the violence of his youth had left permanent marks on his body. In 1806, a duel over his wife's honor put one bullet near his heart. The shot from Charles Dickinson broke 2 ribs and lodged inches from Jackson's vital organ. In 1813, a shootout with the Benton brothers in downtown Nashville left another bullet lodged in his left shoulder. The slug shattered bone and nearly cost him his arm. Both wounds caused Jackson decades of pain. Chronic infections flared around the bullet sites. Abscesses formed and reopened repeatedly. The chest wound never properly healed, causing constant discomfort for 39 years. By 1832, the shoulder bullet had migrated enough that a Navy physician could remove it, without anesthesia. Jackson's health improved somewhat after the removal, but the damage had been done. By his final months, Jackson was gravely ill from multiple afflictions. Severe edema caused fluid to build throughout his body, a condition then called dropsy, now recognized as congestive heart failure. His lungs struggled with every breath. He had suffered from tuberculosis for years, likely contracted as a teenager during British captivity. He coughed blood regularly. His kidneys were failing. Decades of chronic inflammation and repeated infections had worn down his organs. In early June, Jackson could barely remain conscious. The pain was constant now. Fluid filled his chest cavity, pressing against his lungs. Each breath was a fight. He could no longer speak clearly. His family gathered around his bed, watching him fade. On June 8, 1845, his heart finally gave out. The official causes were dropsy, tuberculosis, and heart failure. Modern medical analysis suggests kidney failure delivered the final blow. The violence of his youth, those bullets, those wounds, had caused him decades of misery, but it was chronic disease, not lead poisoning, that ultimately claimed him. Andrew Jackson died surrounded by family, his body finally surrendering after 78 hard-lived years. Death by excruciating throat cancer. June 1884, New York City. Ulysses S. Grant felt a sharp pain while eating a peach. He had been smoking cigars for decades, sometimes 20 a day. The pain did not go away. By October, a doctor examined his throat and found a tumor at the base of his tongue. The diagnosis was terminal throat cancer. Grant was 62 years old and there was no cure. But there was another problem. Grant was bankrupt. Bad investments had destroyed his savings. If he died now, his wife would be left with nothing. A publisher offered him a deal to write his memoirs. The book could provide for his family. He had to finish it before the cancer killed him. The tumor grew rapidly. Within months, swallowing became agonizing. Food scraped against raw tissue. He lost massive amounts of weight, eventually dropping to 90 pounds. His voice weakened to a whisper, then disappeared entirely. He communicated by writing notes on scraps of paper. The pain required constant doses of morphine and cocaine applications just to remain functional. By June 1885, the tumor was visible inside his throat. It had grown outward, a mass of diseased tissue that pressed against his airway. Breathing became difficult. Each breath required conscious effort, but he kept writing page after page, racing against the clock. His hand shook from weakness and medication. When he grew too weak to write, he dictated to a stenographer. In mid-July, Grant moved to a cottage in the Adirondacks to complete his work in peace. On July 18, 1885, he finished the manuscript. The tumor had severely constricted his breathing. Suffocation loomed. The cancer had ravaged his body for over a year. On July 23, 1885, 5 days after completing his memoirs, Ulysses S. Grant died. He had fought the pain every single day to finish the work, and he succeeded. The book became a bestseller and provided financial security for his widow, earning $450,000 in royalties. But the cost was 13 months of unrelenting agony, every word written while his throat closed and his body wasted away. Sudden heart attack amid scandal. August 2, 1923, Palace Hotel, San Francisco. President Warren G. Harding was on his Voyage of Understanding tour traveling across the country to connect with voters. But his administration was collapsing under the weight of corruption scandals. The Teapot Dome affair had exposed bribery at the highest levels. Cabinet members were under investigation. Harding appeared exhausted, worn down by the pressure. After a grueling trip to Alaska, he complained of food poisoning on the journey back. Then came chest pains. Doctors diagnosed a heart attack and ordered complete bed rest in his hotel suite. For several days, he remained in bed while his condition was monitored. By August 2nd, he seemed to be improving. Doctors issued statements at 4:30 that afternoon, declaring he was recovering. He sat propped up against pillows while his wife Florence read to him from the Saturday Evening Post. He appeared relaxed, even cheerful. Then, without warning, he shuddered. His body jerked. Within seconds, he was gone. The time was approximately 7:30 in the evening. Florence and two nurses, Ruth Powderly and Sue Dosser, were in the room. They called for doctors, but there was nothing they could do. Warren G. Harding was dead. The official cause was listed as either cerebral hemorrhage or heart attack, but Florence refused to allow an autopsy. In the days following his funeral, she began systematically destroying his personal papers. Over several weeks at the White House, at Evelyn McLean's estate, and later in Marion, she burned letters and documents. Rumors spread immediately. Had it really been a heart attack? Some whispered that Florence had poisoned him to spare him from impeachment and disgrace. Others suspected political enemies had arranged his death. The truth remains elusive. No autopsy meant no definitive answers. Papers burned meant personal correspondence was lost forever. Modern historians largely agree it was a heart attack brought on by long-standing cardiac problems. But the 1930 publication of a discredited book claiming Florence poisoned him ensured the rumors would persist. Warren G. Harding's sudden death remains one of the most mysterious in presidential history, forever shadowed by unanswered questions. Violent gastrointestinal death after leaving office. June 15, 1849, Nashville, Tennessee. James K. Polk had left the presidency just 103 days earlier. He was 53 years old, but 4 years in office had destroyed his health. He had been the hardest working president in history, micromanaging every detail of government, sleeping little, driving himself relentlessly. His body had paid the price. In early June, Polk fell ill with cholera. The disease had already ravaged Nashville that year, killing hundreds in a city of only 10,000. He had written in his diary just weeks earlier about the epidemic spreading through the city, noting his intention to stay home as much as possible. But precautions proved insufficient. Cholera is a bacterial infection that attacks the intestines, causing the body to lose massive amounts of fluid, severe diarrhea, and vomiting. The disease can kill with terrifying speed. Without treatment, victims can deteriorate within hours as dehydration sets in. The body loses critical fluids and electrolytes, leading to muscle cramps, kidney failure, and eventually shock as the circulatory system collapses. Polk had likely contracted a milder case during his journey home through New Orleans months earlier, where the disease was prevalent. He recovered then, believing himself restored to health. But in June, the illness returned with deadly force. The former president held on for several days as doctors attempted treatment. The medical practices of 1849 offered little help. Physicians prescribed laxatives and bleeding, treatments that only worsened dehydration. There were no antibiotics, no intravenous fluids, no effective intervention against the disease ravaging his weakened body. On June 15, 1849, James K. Polk died from cholera at his Nashville home, Polk Place. His retirement had lasted barely 3 months, the shortest post-presidency of any American leader. 4 years of exhausting labor had left him with no reserves to fight infection. He was buried within 24 hours in the Nashville City Cemetery's cholera section as was standard practice to prevent the disease from spreading. The man who had expanded America's territory to the Pacific Ocean was gone, killed by a disease that thrived in the very cities his policies had helped build. If you want to see more videos like this, click the video on screen now and make sure to subscribe.